Hey guys, welcome back to yet another video. It is still smoky here in Sacramento. I don't know how well the smoke comes across on camera. For those of you who don't know, the California wildfires have been going crazy recently, and all of that smoke likes to come over, settle down, and make its home here in the Sacramento Valley, which is unfortunate because I can't fly in the smoke, and I'll explain why in a little bit. So instead, I've decided to do a little walk around of my airplane, get you guys acquainted with it, and get into all the specs from the engine slash airframe to even what it costs to buy one of these little airplanes. But before we get into that, I just want to say this is going to be one of two videos. This is video one. It's going to be talking about the airplane and all the specs of the airplane, and video two is going to be about me. A lot of people asked how I became a pilot, kind of how I got to where I am, and I didn't want to put both of those stories into one video just because some people simply might not care about my story. So I decided I'll just make two videos. I'll film that one right after I'm done filming this one, and I'll drop them at the same time. I'll link it in the description below, so if you want to check it out, feel free. By the way, in the house we have Vesta, the German Shepherd, and we have Daniel, my brother. He's going to help me film this video. You guys met him in the Aerobatic competition vlog. Vesta's going crazy because she likes to be on camera. Anyway, Daniel, here's the camera. All right, so first and foremost, this is the Pitts S1S aerobatic biplane. The serial number is 7-0266, and it was actually originally built and registered in Canada. But what happened is the airplane was ground looped upon a landing. It's very common for these airplanes. They're very prone to getting ground looped. So what happened is they had to take apart the airplane, they reskinned it, they actually overhauled the engine, and then sold it to a gentleman in North Carolina in the United States. They re-registered it to an American N number, and then I bought it from that gentleman and ferried it across to California. So this airplane has been around a little bit. Now, a Pitts S1S, I just want to quickly go over what that is. Curtis Pitts was the original inventor and designer and even maker of this airplane. So he just took his last name and made a Pitts special. Curtis Pitts, and he made a Pitts special. So that's what the Pitts S1 stands for. The 1 stands for single seat airplane. This airplane comes in two versions, a single seat or a 2 seat. I have the single seat, and so I have a Pitts S1S. The last S stands for symmetrical airfoil, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But for now, let's just go ahead and get into the walk around of the airplane. We'll start on this side of the plane. You can see here, I have a little needle sticking out of my wing, and this is actually a device that measures airspeed. It gives me the airspeed information inside in the cockpit. No, this is not a machine gun. This is not a missile. It just gives me airspeed information inside. All right, now you might notice that this airplane has two wings, so it's a biplane, top and bottom wing. And for my Pitts guys, you guys know that a stock Pitts wing has a half-round wingtip. These are not wolf wings. These are not stock Pitts wings. These are what are called precision wings. They're not super common, but from what I know, they weigh a little bit more than the stock Pitts wing, but their performance is a little bit better. So you can see with the cutoff wing, you can see exactly what this airfoil looks like. And you can see that this is a symmetrical airfoil. Here's what a conventional airfoil looks like. You can see at the bottom, it's pretty much flat, and then it rounds off towards the top. And here's a symmetrical airfoil. It's round on the top, and it's round on the bottom. Now, the advantage to this versus a conventional airfoil is that the wing behaves pretty much the same, whether it's upside down or right side up. Now, technically speaking, there is an angle of incidence with these wings as compared to the airplane. So when you're upside down, you actually have to push the stick forward a little bit to keep that altitude. But technically speaking, the wing doesn't know the difference whether it's right side up or upside down. All right, now I'm going to cover something that I get a lot of questions on. Almost every other comment asks about what is that star thing at the end of your wing. And this is what's called an aerobatic sight or aerobatic sighting device. Here's a little string at the very end just for kicks and giggles. I'm just totally kidding. It actually has a purpose as well. Basically, this sighting device is used when we're doing aerobatics, primarily in competition. You can imagine that when I pull up into the vertical, there's no way of really telling whether or not you're going perfectly straight up. However, this bar is parallel with the wing chord, which is what the judges are looking for. And if you put this line on the horizon when you're going straight up, it's 90 degrees to the wing chord, which means you're going straight up into the air. And if you're pitched forward a little bit, you'll see that. If you're pitched back a little bit, you'll see that. These lines are 45 lines. You can see if you're going upright 45 or inverted 45, going down, up, whatever. These will show you whether or not you're perfectly on a line. Now, this is a very basic type of instrument, and the reason being is that when you're doing a lot of tumbles or a lot of G's, vacuum gauges or gyro instruments will probably go bad, and so you can't trust them. And so we rely on very basic instrumentation to help us out. This little string serves its purpose as well. If I'm ever pulled up for long enough to where I start falling backwards, this string will actually flip-flop and point the other way. That moment, this exact moment, is when I know that I'm starting to fly backwards, which you could actually do in these airplanes. This string is also useful when I'm in a taxi. It kind of lets me know what the wind is doing without ever having to look at the windsock, and it lets me know what the wind is doing right where I'm at, because oftentimes you'll have a windsock somewhere far away from you. This actually shows me if I have a crosswind, if I have a tailwind, if I have a headwind. I can kind of see what's going on. Obviously not when you're flying, but when you're on the ground, when you're standing still, or when you're in the run-up, you can use this to help you out. All right, now we're going to make our way back towards the tail end. You can see I have a dog bowl down there for the little breather valve. Extra oil drains out of there if I ever pulled a lot of G, or excess oil will drain out there. So I just leave it there not to get the hanger all dirty. Now you can see the horizontal and vertical tail surfaces. These control surfaces are pretty big, and the control throws, you can see, are fairly big when compared to the size of this airplane as opposed to, let's say, a Cessna 172. These controls are huge, and you can see the ailerons too. I forgot to mention, these ailerons are also pretty big, and we got 2 of them. Well, actually technically 4, but 1 on each wing, and 1 over there and 1 over there. So we got 4 ailerons and big surfaces here, which means you got a lot of control. It's a very touchy airplane. Now, this is the rudder. For my Pitts guys out there, you might notice that this is not a regular sized rudder. This is actually extended. A regular Pitts rudder is a little bit smaller than this. This one was extended, which I actually looked at as a big plus because it gives you a little bit more control. Obviously, more control means you can easily over control it. But once you learn how to use it, I think this is definitely a plus. All right, now going down from the rudder, you can see below here, we got a tail wheel, and it's really small, and this is actually a locking tail wheel. As you remember, this airplane was actually in an accident where it was ground looped. Hey, Vess. As you remember, this airplane was actually in an accident where it was ground looped. So with the locking tail wheel, it pretty much locks that sucker going straight forward and helps the pilot avoid a direct ground loop. However, as you can see, that's fully locked, but it still has a little bit of give. And that does not look like much, but when you're going down the runway at 100 miles an hour, even that little amount of give can cause you to veer off the runway quite hard, actually. By the way, there's a bunch of airplane / helicopter noises. We are at an airport after all, but most of those, if not all of them, are helping fight the California wildfires. So I'm not complaining as long as you guys can still hear me. All right, now walking around to this side of the airplane, we have a trim tab right here, actually. Don't really got to get into that too much. Standard old trim tab. So we got our radio antenna right here. I got 1 radio on this airplane, no backup. And as you can see, there's a little cord going to my airplane. As I mentioned before, this airplane doesn't have an alternator, so I'm literally charging the battery from a wall outlet. All right, now we'll take a look inside of the cockpit. You open it from 2 sides, slide it all the way back, and take a look inside. It's pretty simple. We got my parachute. It shows in here. I put it on before I go fly. Some people asked about that. Yes, I do fly with the parachute just because it gives you another bailout option if you ever had an emergency. And I'll show you what's in here real quick. It might be easier if I'm inside the plane. All right, so starting here at the bottom by my legs, we have a fuel selector, and then I have a manual fuel pump, which I use to prime the engine before I start it. We have a trim right here. We have a throttle with a little push to talk button right here. We got the mixture control down here. And then we got our master, which turns on the battery. We got the mag switch, the starter right here, airspeed, altimeter, single radio. We got the RPMs, and we got the G meter right here. Oil temperature, oil pressure, and cylinder head temperature, all right here. You got the stick and your hand flying pretty much the entire time. Oh, and one thing I forgot behind this Aerobatic card is a magnetic compass. So yes, I do have one of those. And if we look inside, you can see I have a header tank. That right there is a header tank. That is what gives me fuel when I'm upside down. That supplies fuel to the engine, and I think it gives you about 2 minutes of inverted aerobatic performance. I'm not sure, I didn't test it yet, but that's what it does. And one thing I did actually forget to mention is this hooker 5-point harness. This is what keeps you inside of the airplane, doesn't throw you out when you're doing negative G's or anything like that. It keeps you nice and secure. You basically cinch yourself up until you could barely breathe, and that's how you know you're tight enough. Now, if I didn't mention it, then I most likely don't have it. I don't think I really forgot anything. This airplane doesn't have a vertical speed indicator, attitude indicator, autopilot, a transponder, things like that. Some of the most basic aviation instruments that you would find in a regular Cessna are not in this airplane because it's built to be light, it's built to be a performer, and it's not built for cross country or anything like that. The max never exceed speed is actually 203 miles an hour. The G limits are +6, -3 Gs, and you might be able to see this big half circle is actually the bottom of my main tank. Pretty much got a giant gas tank in my laps, which is great for an engine fire. Now that tank holds 18 gallons of fuel, and I have a little header tank that's right up there, and that holds 4.5 gallons of additional gas, which is what I use during my cross country. All right, so moving on to this side of the airplane, we're gonna talk about the wings a little bit more. A lot of people don't realize what these wings are actually made out of. Again, these airplanes are made to be very light, but still very strong. However, you'll be surprised to know that this is actually fabric. Yeah, that's right. This is fabric. A lot of airplanes are actually made out of fabric. This is something that's not uncommon, but the newer airplanes are usually made out of composites, such as carbon fiber or even fiberglass. So this wing is primarily made out of wood. The core is made out of wood, and then it's covered in fabric. The fuselage, the frame, is actually a steel tube frame, so it's made to be very strong. And then I have some sheet metal parts and then some composite parts right here, like this cowl. But for the most part, the wings are covered in fabric, which helps keep these airplanes very light. As I mentioned before, I never weighed this airplane myself, but from what I'm told, it's probably around 850 pounds, which is quite ridiculous. If you know anything about airplanes, there are airplanes that weigh less than this, but just so you get an idea, a Mini Cooper car weighs more than this airplane. And one last thing about these wings, if you look down here, we got these fun little shovel looking things, and these are known as spades. Now what they're for, it's basically like power steering in a car. When you're flying aerobatics and you have to throw the stick completely from one side to the other, if you don't have those spades, it can actually be a two-hand job, and you might have to actually have some muscle in order to muscle that stick all the way around. With those spades, if you think about it, when an aileron is deflected, that spade is deflected and it helps push, the relative wind helps push your aileron in the direction that you want to go, and so it basically changes it from being a two-hand job to like a two-finger throw around, and it makes it very, very light and very, very easy to control. Alright, now let's get into the engine. The power plant that we have on this bad boy is an IO360 AFCO Lycoming engine. Stock, these engines push out about 180 horsepower, but I was told it's probably pushing closer to about 200 horsepower. It's fuel injected. Now, for those of you who don't really know much about airplanes, you might be thinking that that's a pretty low horsepower when compared to a car. But for you to understand, this engine is the type that can be found in, let's say, a 4-seater Cessna, an airplane that can pick up 4 people. However, this airplane is only designed for one person and only weighs 850 pounds. So the power to weight ratio is quite incredible. Another thing is that engine horsepower is measured at the engine RPM redline. So your car might be redlining at like 6, 7, 8,000 RPM. General aviation airplanes, including this engine, they redline at 2,700 RPMs, which is much lower, obviously. However, you can take my word for it, this is a lot of power for an airplane of this size. Now, if we come around to this side, you'll see that we have the Christian inverted oil system. So that allows us to fly upside down and still supply oil to the engine. And up at the front, we got a spinner and we got a 2-blade metal prop. It's pretty big, it's pretty heavy, it's only 2 blades, so that's a lot of gyroscopic precession when you're doing aerobatics. I don't really want to get into details of what that is, but if you know, you know. It's a fixed pitch, and the only way you can adjust is removing this and adjusting it here on the ground. But for the most part, you set it to whatever pitch you want, and then you don't change it. Now, one last thing I wanted to talk about was this right here, air intake. That's a straight suction straight into the engine. There's no air filter on that intake, and that's one of the reasons, one of many actually, that I don't want to go flying here when it's smoky outside, because I don't want to push that kind of stuff into my engine. Another reason is because this airplane's not IFR certified. Obviously, it doesn't have any lights on any of the wings, no position lights, nothing like that, so I can't even fly at night in this airplane. But when the smoke gets too bad and it's IFR, obviously I can't fly. You don't want to be flying IFR in a pits. Oh, and I almost forgot, we got some windows right here on the side of the rudders. The rudder pedals are actually right here, and this is where my feet would be during flight. And the purpose of these windows is, as I mentioned, you can't see anything out of the front, above the cowl, above the engine when you're flying down the runway. So you can actually look out those windows and you can see the sides of the runways when you're flying. And I have a clear panel beneath me as well, so I could look down, I can see the center line. And then when you're flying in a competition, you can use these to look out and try to spot the box. Use the panel below you to see the box as well. These are all tools to help make flying this airplane just a little bit easier. Alright, now I want to talk a little bit about the purchase price of this airplane. I think most people have a misconception that when you're going to buy an airplane, you're going to spend hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. And for those people, I have great news. If you're looking to general aviation, more specifically experimental airplanes, experimental aircraft, it could be a lot more affordable, a lot cheaper than you might actually think. I bought this airplane, this experimental Pitts S1S, for $40,000, which is basically the price of a middle-class brand new car. Now, believe it or not, you can find airplanes, even certified airplanes, for cheaper than that, but they're usually going to be high-time older airplanes. Quick interruption from the future. I just finished filming and realized that I completely forgot to mention the engine and airframe times when I bought the airplane. Just so you guys know, the time of the engine since major overhaul was about 150 hours, which is pretty low for these engines, and the airframe total was about 700 hours total time on the airframe. So overall, this was a pretty good condition, low time Pitts S1S, and so that was the price for it. When it comes to talking about experimental airplanes, especially the Pitts S1s, you have several different categories to choose from. I have the S1S, slightly bigger engine, slightly nicer engine, better wings, bigger rudder. So I was kind of actually paying more of a premium price. I wasn't paying the top tier, but I definitely wasn't at the bottom. So you can find airplanes that are even more affordable than that. And the good news is, even for that amount, you can actually finance these airplanes. The bad news is, and there's actually even a saying in aviation, which is the cheapest part of owning an airplane is the actual purchase price. There's a lot more that goes into owning an airplane, such as this hangar cost, insurance, annual, oil, gas, things like that. All of that adds up, and eventually you're paying a lot of money even before you put a single hour on the airplane. Now, I want to break down exactly why these airplanes cost what they cost. And number one is it's an experimental airplane. And what that means is someone can basically build it from a kit or from scratch in a garage and go through a series of test flights and sign it off as an experimental aircraft. These airplanes are not built out of factory and do not have factory certified parts, which lowers the value because there's no real warranty on these airplanes. However, that's very common for these types of airplanes, and in fact, a lot of pilots, myself included, would actually prefer to have an experimental airplane versus a certified airplane. Basically, in a nutshell, it costs a lot more money to maintain a certified airplane. You have to use certified parts and all of that versus an experimental airplane, which you could pretty much do. It's much more lenient. You could pretty much do whatever you want to it, and I could do a lot of the maintenance myself, or I can have a simple A&P do it. You don't need an A&P IA. Now, probably the second biggest reason that these airplanes are priced at what they are is that it's only a single seat airplane. I literally cannot take any other person up with me. You can't share the fun, which drops the price of these airplanes down a lot. There's a lot less people who actually want these airplanes because you pretty much have to be a bonehead like me, mainly into aerobatics, to even buy these airplanes. Just so you get an idea, a two-seat version of this airplane, like a S2B, S2A, or even S2C, would cost 2, 3, or maybe even 4 times as much as what I paid for this airplane. That's because this is a smaller airplane and it also uses a smaller engine, which helps decrease that cost. Also, because it's missing a lot of basic instrumentation and electronics, that brings the cost down a little bit. And then it's a fixed pitch prop. It's not controllable pitch from inside, which takes some of the mechanics out of it and also brings the cost down. But as I mentioned before, you can actually find certified airplanes, even Cessnas, for cheaper than what I paid for this airplane. And like I said, you can get financed for that, and you can actually be paying basically what you would be paying on a car payment, and you would own an airplane. Once again, what I said earlier, the problem with doing that is usually you're getting a very high time older airplane. However, if you treat it well and you give it the maintenance that it deserves, it's going to serve you many, many years. And so there you have it. Hopefully that gave you guys a little bit of a better idea of what it is that I actually bought and then how much I paid for it and yada yada. The goal with this airplane is to pursue aerobatics. It's really the only thing it was built for. It's not really designed to do anything else, and that's why I bought it. My goal is to pursue the competition route and go as far as I can in that, and the end goal is actually to become a professional airshow pilot. I know that there's plenty of great pilots who fly these S1s at very high levels in competition, but from what I understand, I'm probably going to have to transition into a monoplane at some point. However, I love biplanes, so we'll just cross that bridge when we get there. Anyways, that's pretty much the gist of this video. I think I covered pretty much everything. If you still have a question, leave it in the comments and I'll do my best to answer it. I had a lot of people ask me my story and kind of how I became a pilot, so I'll go ahead and film that and I'll link that in the description of this video as well. I'll post both of these videos at the same time, so if you're interested, you can watch it. I didn't want to put all of that into one video because it would make a very long video, and then some of you guys probably don't even care about how I got to where I am, so I didn't want to force feed anybody. However, if you're curious, feel free to check that out. It's going to be in the description, or just look it up on my channel. Anyways, that's pretty much that. I think this is the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. I am still going to do a technical breakdown of how I did the coast-to-coast cross-country flight. That's still coming, so stay tuned for that. Again, thanks for watching. Peace out.